Well, hello, Sandy. How are you doing?
Amy, I am good. Ready to
Good.
podcast again. Been doing a little traveling. So
Yeah. How's
the
your
the
traveling
listeners,
been?
the listeners never know this, but sometimes we have to bop around with our taping, even though we're consistently dropping on Thursdays. Hint, hint, sometimes our taping does not follow that. You know what? Planes, trains, and automobiles, everything was wonderful. A lot of weather, canceled flights, rescheduled flights, me trying to drive in bad weather, but at the end of the day, very successful family reunion, and my mom was happy. And if my mom's happy, I'm happy. So it was her family's reunion that I was organizing.
I love that. That's so much fun. So you guys were in the Vegas area, right?
Well, my kids flew into Vegas, and my niece and my nephew drove there. That's how I congregated my posse. It was
Uh-huh.
in Lake Havasu City, which is a 2.5 drive from Vegas. A lot of people actually flew into Phoenix and drove from there,
Okay.
but because they're young adults, they also liked flying into Vegas because they spent a night there, and I actually spent a night there with them. The goal was to pick them up, but because of weather, it was better for me to go north than through Flagstaff. So it was a lot of dealing with weather and following on the internet as well as flights, because I had 2 out of 3 kids had flights. No, actually 3 out of 4 that flew. 3 of my kids, my niece, had either canceled or changed flights, but
And a lot of that, well, we
it was
could just
weather.
we could talk all day about your travels. We should probably, because I was going to ask you another question. I was like, oh, I should just stop. I should stop.
It plays into the Buffett factor, because I was reading and I was learning a lot about different things in the process of all of this. So maybe it wasn't the most focused, but I wasn't sitting like a bump on a log, and I listened to a lot of audiobooks when I was on the road.
Right. So this Buffett formula is an extension of our conversation last week, which was about growth mindset. And we started digging into growth mindset. And one of the things that was mentioned is this Buffett formula. And the Buffett formula basically is go to bed smarter than you woke up. That's basically the gist of it.
And then it's gist of it is go to bed smarter than you when you woke up. For Warren and Charlie, partners, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett. I don't think we have to, and anybody who doesn't know, Google it, but I'm sure most people do. Theirs is reading, theirs is reading. But I actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, because what does make you smarter? How are you spending your time? They read in an insane amount of time. And I put a calculator to some of the numbers and stats that they threw out, because I thought this is crazy. It's interesting because 2 different articles that I read, one said that Warren reads 500 pages a day. Another one said it's 500 pages a week. Okay. The 500 pages a week for strictly reading books, I do that. Okay. The 500 a day, that's a lot of time. But, I can't wait to have this discussion, because what accounts for reading, what accounts for learning, and how do you check the box in knowing that you're smarter at the end of the day without saying I have to do it by reading 500 pages a day or reading 10 hours a day. I think the 2 big things that Buffett said was he spends 80% of his time reading.
Of his workday.
Reading.
Yes.
But then I thought the other interesting thing was it isn't like reading in a bubble, because they talk a lot. And I did read his book, which was a really good read, by the way. And a very meaningful read was his book. And I want to make sure I'm calling it the right thing.
Snowball.
The Snowball.
Yes.
But he talked about they read a lot, but they bounce ideas off of each other. So going to bed, the Buffett formula, to me, it's so important to be smarter every time you go to bed, but you have to share it too, right? Like if it's just reading that's a great self-enriching thing. But part of it is sharing with other people. And even his 80% in the workday, he talked about how he can bring something up to Charlie and he knows within 30 seconds, he's trying to formulate different ideas, listening. So they're learning from each other too.
Right.
But that doesn't give you a lot of time. That 80% of reading, how much of that is discussing reading? Because, one of the things back to how I've been spending my time, I just spent 5 days at a film festival. And my final tally and my visual, the yellow are the shorts, the pink are the features. There were 100 movies. I saw 68 movies in those 5 days, 4.5 days.
Wow.
Second through 4.5 days, 27 were features and 41 were shorts. Well, I learned a lot through storytelling, and there was so much I gained from a lot of these movies. And they're documentaries, they're Native American series, all kinds of different things. But I'm not going to apologize for watching pure fiction entertainment, because those stories I learned from those too. And I think that was one thing I came away from last week that I'd love to talk about is, do we have to read nonfiction? What is learning? What is growing?
Yep.
And what counts?
I think anything that challenges your perspective, anything that you walk away feeling like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, so I don't think you can quantify it, because you could read 10 pages and it could be something really valuable that taught you something, that changed your perspective, that you're now, well, like the book Atomic Habits. I think about that, how big is that book? That's not even 200, maybe it's 200 pages, maybe, I don't know.
Sure, somewhere between 250 and 300 would be my guess.
So 250, 300 pages. We read that over a period of time. That is a book that I think about. It's changed my perspective. It's changed how I work. That is a book that resonated. I've read other nonfiction books that I completely have forgotten about, that went in and out and did not teach me much of anything.
But I'll tell you one thing, I'm a better writer from being a reader. And that makes me a better person. I'm better with grammar. I'm better with, and anybody will say that no matter what you read, it can help you. It does help you in understanding language too.
And thinking, and just putting thoughts together, and just being able to communicate better verbally and everything. Reading is just, it's definitely the way to go. But one of the things, this 80%, he spends 80% of his working day reading and thinking. And I was working with a group this week and talking to them about, creating space in their time, in their calendars for thinking, for processing. So, and these are all young professionals, I would say, like in the throes of their careers, and they're hustling and, doing all that stuff. And so I was kind of sharing this, and this is kind of a habit that has the compound interest of, I can read today and I may not see the benefits today, but over the time, you're going to get these bigger benefits in all sorts of different ways. Okay. This group though, you should have seen the look on their faces. It was like really? and I was like, I get it. That 80% signifies a lot of privilege that he had control over his calendar and his schedule to even allow for 80% of reading and thinking time.
It's crazy. Right.
I know. Those young professionals are like, right. My boss would be like, sorry, I'm thinking here.
and it's being able to, we go from Zoom call to Zoom call. And another way I thought to apply this back to investing in yourself, he didn't talk about there's those books, how many books I'm going to go through, they go to pages, but he talked about the the stack of papers, because a lot of what they've done, and I love this, is they study balance sheets, they study income statements, they think, they're reviewing them deeply. So, and then they're reading articles about the stories of the businesses. He often says, if I don't understand it, it's not something I'm going to invest in. And it reminded me of a story, and then application to now. When I was a young CPA, we had really good researchers that were partners there, and they were tax people. And I would go to them when I got a complex question. And there's so much of a difference between having somebody else do the research for you versus you doing it yourself. Even if you don't, maybe you get to a certain point, then you go get that affirmation in the end. But back to being a learner and being a smarter person at the end of the day, I remember this was before computers, really. It was before internet. He escorted me to the library and said, did you know we have this beautiful library? And he very nicely introduced me to the library and said, and it wasn't in a bad way, he did it in a perfect way. And he said, why don't you try to get to the answer and then run by me what you're thinking, and then I'll help you debate the conclusion. And that was great advice for me, because it is so easy sometimes to let somebody get to the answers for you. And that reading and thinking and knowing I could run it by him, right? Because I needed to present it to a client, was a great lesson for me early on, because I'm the person who would avoid that library and go to the fiction book or the movies, because maybe it wasn't that much fun, right?
Right. Yeah. That's great. And that encourages people, it gives them a safe space to think about it, come up with the solution, and then let's talk about it. And let's see, and you have to be safe to fail. And that's part of this whole philosophy, is there's this safety that's safe to fall.
And being smarter when you go to bed is going outside your comfort zones at times.
Yeah.
So now my example would be in Salesforce. I work on the financial side. Garrett works on more the development side and with the developers. And it's so easy to throw things at them for a solution. And what I've found is, rather than saying, it's somebody says it's broke, send it to Garrett, I might do a little bit of research and say, that's a custom field, or, thinking through the pros and cons, risk reward. And then instead of saying it's broke, fix it, I'm a way better consultant by taking that time to review it before handing it over to him, because I'm smarter in the next time that comes up to me from a client, and knowing the limitations and then also the opportunities, because I've taken some time not to just wash my hands of it and say, not in my silo.
Right. Right. Well, you just said something a minute ago about it makes you be vulnerable, or it makes you be, wanting to learn. I can't remember what you just said. I'm like, I should have written it down. It goes in and out, because I start thinking about the other stuff here. I start listening to everything else, and I'm like, okay, what did you say? But anyway, there is a vulnerability about saying, I'm going to go to bed smarter than I am. I'm going to go to bed smarter tonight, because that means this morning you weren't as smart as you could be. You know what I mean? And
right.
Some people have a hard time admitting that they're not as smart as they could be in the morning, which is wrong. Nobody's as smart as they could be. We can all learn all the time.
With the Buffett formula, the other thing that he is not expressed in these articles specifically, or when they describe it, is his great ability to know and say he doesn't know everything. He never feels like, oh my gosh. I mean, look at what better example could there be? Warren Buffett. I mean, that guy's got it figured out. He knows everything, and he'd be the first to say, I don't know everything. And that's very vulnerable in doing that. And he was the first to say, I surround myself with great people, but that he doesn't wash his hands of it either. He wants to learn more, because he later did invest in Apple. He wouldn't invest in them early on because he didn't understand it. And it took time. And, he eventually surrounded himself with people. He learned more. He talked, and he got to the point where he was able to express that. And as consultants, Amy, isn't it interesting for us? I am fine with, and if people aren't comfortable with me saying that, they're not a good client for me either. If I don't have the answer, I don't have the answers to everything. And,
Right.
or I might have to develop my thought process on it, want to run it by somebody. And many times I'll say, I don't know the answer to that, and I will get back to you. And if people aren't comfortable with that, I'm not the right consultant either, because nobody knows everything.
Right, right. And if you want a consultant that knows everything, then you probably have the wrong consultant. I'm just
Right.
going to tell you that you're looking for
Right.
the wrong thing. I had a client just the other day ask me, it was in a group setting, and she was like, so what do you recommend for this? It was like asking me a recommendation. And it was like, when do you strategically look at your calendar or something like that? And I'm like, well, I'm not, it depends. It depends on you. It depends on the person. It depends on the calendar. It depends on what
Right.
all's going on. Some people might need to do a strategic review of their calendar, once a week. Some people might need to do it every single day. Some people might need to do it once a month. It's kind of like it depends on you in the process. And I could tell she was just a little like,
That's not the answer I
just
wanted.
give me an answer. So it was actually kind of funny, but it is, everything's customizable to who you are and how you process stuff. And I think that's having this growth mindset and this Buffett formula, wanting to be a learner, is all part of that. And just knowing that you're not the smartest person in the room. Now, here's my question. When you come across people who don't have the growth mindset, how do you shift that? Because I'm just going to tell you, I'm attending a class tomorrow night on this. And it's how to shift your client's perspective into a growth mindset. So I come across people all the time who say, I just don't understand technology, so I'm not going to do that system. Or I don't understand what this is. So it's just kind of like they close the door on it and they don't even want to learn about it. And that's just kind of their excuse. And I did this one time. I was working with a tech company, a very technical tech company. And I said, well, I'm just not very techy. And after I said it, I was like, well, really, I actually kind of am. I'm just not as techy as you guys are.
Right.
But I felt like I kind of shut that door and said, I'm not techy. And I was like, okay, that was probably not quite correct. And I fixed it.
It's back to judging yourself against them. And there are all different situations to the growth
Right.
mindset.
Totally. Yes. So I'm curious, how do you shift people's mindset if they don't have a growth mindset? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yes. And what's interesting is you bring it up, because I work with a lot of startups, entrepreneurs. If anything, I've got people with heavy growth mindset.
Right, right.
But,
I know people like that too. Information overload.
I would tell you my honest answer is to make them feel at ease and know that being vulnerable is okay. And if we can get that barrier down, because I think vulnerability is the first step. And I'll give you an example. I was at a board meeting, and it was the first time this small board was together. And I felt like one of the executives, she was not a finance person. She was not a tech person. She was more sales and marketing, but she kept apologizing that she wasn't, kind of like what we were talking about, but she wasn't that person, and she's going to have to learn the finances. And it wasn't a growth mindset, because it was the mindset of feeling like she wasn't bringing to the table what other people were bringing to the table. And really the first step in that and other situations is making them feel like they can be vulnerable, and none of us know anything. And we're there as a board because we all bring different things to the table, and we do need to be learners, because we're learning about the business. We're learning about different sides of the business and how they all come together. And, coming in thinking you know it all is not the best board. The best board is forming for the joint mission, right? But I'd say that's the first step that I see is
Mhm.
getting people to the point where they don't feel that they feel comfortable in being vulnerable and being comfortable in putting their ideas out there
Yeah.
and not being the expert on everything.
And I'm sitting here thinking about it, and the times that we feel the most accepted, normalized, is when someone else shows that they're not perfect. Like somebody else, you start talking and you make a mistake and you're like, oh, that was wrong. I made a mistake, and you own it, and you're like, or I don't know that. Does somebody else know that? So it's like, you're showing, I don't know that. Who else knows that? Or, where can we find that out? Instead of walking in with the all knowing and not, and giving the expectation that everybody has to walk in all knowing. Because when the leader sets that tone of all knowing, then everybody else doesn't feel safe not to know.
Or sometimes you have to retreat on different ideas or different opinions. And as they get shaped, what you thought it was isn't what you later think it is, because you are open-minded to bringing in learning, bringing in new ideas and new thinking that change your thinking, and that it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to reframe what I said, or I'm going to add to that. And that's not easy to do.
Or I'm just going to state, you guys have changed my mind, or, like, just whatever. You're right. It's not easy to do.
How about growth mindset with kids, and how to encourage kids? And for us, we're talking about adult children, but I guess it'd be across the board because they were young once too. I always said I always wanted my kids to be big readers. Now with audiobooks, actually they do read more than they did when I was trying to force them to. But man, they take in, I've got a couple that take in a lot of movies, some documentaries. Learning comes in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's part. I also think telling stories about yourself when you weren't shining your best. I was telling Taylor a story the other day, and gosh, I can't remember what it was, but I remember thinking, this is really exposing me. Like it was something I had done in my 20s or something like that. And I was like, this is kind of showing her a different side of me. And I was like, but that's okay. And I can't remember what I was telling her. I wish I could remember. But I think, because I'm just going to say, growing up, my parents only shared the good stuff. And so I always had this image of them, of this perfection, because they didn't share like the struggles. They didn't share the arguments. They didn't share the times they made mistakes, unless I actually saw it and witnessed it. It was just everything was good. And I kind of get that perspective of sharing the good stuff, but I think we also have to share the bad stuff to show that we're human, we're not perfect. And it helps other people's self-confidence to know that, they can be human too.
And with the fact that the quest is to go to bed smarter every night is saying, right, that's an acknowledgement that you don't know it all. And there's so much more to learn.
And I think this fixed mindset is so much about self-confidence. I think there was something of, you have a pair of tens, you're playing poker and you have a pair of tens, but with a fixed mindset, you're constantly trying to prove it's a royal flush.
Oh, that's great.
I know. And I read that. I was like, oh, isn't that the truth? It's like, I'm constantly trying to prove that I'm good. I'm as good as that royal flush. And so I'm fixed, instead of saying, I'm only a pair of tens, but boy, deal me some more cards and I might be able to make something out of this. So, which is more of a growth mindset.
So are you going to, with the question I have for myself is rather than saying, oh, I got this. I totally do this. I'm smarter every day. How am I going to challenge myself to make sure that I'm intentionally improving myself with learning, thinking, taking the time? That's the challenge I'm making for myself, is rather than saying, oh, check the box, I got this one figured out, is how do I make sure it's intentional that I'm doing this every day? Is it a question you ask yourself?
So it's not, because I'm always reading. I'm always like, I'm reading the newspaper. I'm always getting information. And I think you're doing the exact same thing. Now, what I would say is, it's probably a question I need to ask myself every month and say, am I still doing all these things that support that? Because we've built it into our routines, our daily routines. We've built in, just learning about the world, learning about whatever. So, but there could be a time where we stop, and that's where you want to catch yourself and say, all right, I need to keep reading, and I'll say this, I've done that with the newspaper. I used to read the newspaper every day. And then I kind of was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting exhausted. Like, this last year has been just like, and then so I started reading it Saturday and Sunday and maybe once during the week. This Sunday, we were driving to Kansas City and I spent like an hour and a half in the Sunday newspaper, because I pulled it up on my iPad and I'm like reading it. I was talking to Tom about it, and I gave it an hour and a half to dig into all the articles. There were some really good articles this weekend, and it felt so good. And I was like, this is where I've got to keep spending time doing this, because it just really changed my perspective again. I learned a lot.
One thing I think I'm going to do, and I love that. That's great. Back to the journalism. I get my feeds in the morning and I do get the newspaper here. I'm now listening to Katie Couric's audiobook, which is very good. And what's very good is she's really going back in time and going through some of the key periods in our time. And when things have happened, key issues, because she got these good interviews, or she would get these good interviews and kind of go through those. And it's been very, very interesting for me, because I feel like I'm going back through history and hearing it through through a newscaster, journalist, I gotta use the right word. But I think what I'm going to do, because it was last year, I get caught up in doing things because I get a little competitive with them. And so what was it? Last year, I read 136 books, and I actually brought it down to 120, because somebody said, oh, you're going to go 150. I'm like, no, because it's taking away from other things like the morning. There's only so much time in the day. So what my challenge to myself, and I think this would be a good challenge for other people, whether you feel like you're not sure if you're investing enough, if you're investing in the right areas in learning. I've continued to do the daily checklist. I keep a daily habit checklist just to keep me in check. And nice. I'm not going to get real. I'm not going to keep track of every minute, but I'm going to look at the times I have with reading and see if I'm comfortable with how I'm investing that between books, fiction versus non, ongoing education. There's a lot of different things I'm trying to learn about, preparation for different things, and see if I'm spreading that out. Gosh knows I'm spending enough time on it during the day, but am I covering the areas the right way, or is that 120 books still a bit much?
Yeah, that's good. Or do you do Wordle?
Yes.
I know.
So I was even thinking people say that you can get an unlimited. Nope, not going to do it. I don't need the unlimited. One a day is fun. It's kind of fun to make sure I get it done too before.
Yeah. And it's an opportunity just to sit and think and to focus. And I mean, I think that every day it changes my perspective on myself and how my brain works. At least for me, it's like a constant, like, oh my gosh, my brain went here. And so it's a constant challenge. I think.
It is kind of fun too, because Garrett does it too. And I'll usually do mine in the morning and he does his at night. Have you done Wordle? Oh, this is hard this time. Did you have a hard time? Oh, I got it in 3 this time, so it's a little bit of conversation. And then again, back to the English language,
Right, exactly.
it is the 5-letter words. And I find myself reading things, trying to find new ideas for 5-letter words too.
I'm just going to say I got it today in 3. I think that's why it was at the top of my mind.
I got it in 3 today too.
Got it in 3 today. I know. I was surprised when I got it. I was like, oh, hey. All right. Well, Sandy, thank you for the conversation. I love this whole growth mindset, the Buffett formula, whatever you can do to be open to learning, to be receptive to learning, to want to go to bed smarter than you woke up.
And share it with others.
Yes.
All righty. Till next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.